The name Billy Crystal just makes you smile, whether it calls to mind When Harry Met Sally, City Slickers, Analyze This, Monsters, Inc., or his 9 hosting gigs at the Academy Awards.
In the pantheon of American comedy, Billy Crystal stands as a master craftsman whose impeccable timing and warm storytelling have defined entertainment for generations. From his breakthrough performances on Saturday Night Live to his unforgettable hosting duties at the Academy Awards.
At this point in my life and my career, to find something new and so invigorating is really thrilling.
Crystal has consistently demonstrated that great comedy requires more than just laughs. It demands precision, heart, and an almost surgical understanding of audience psychology. His ability to blend observational humor with deeply personal anecdotes created a template that countless comedians have attempted to emulate. Yet beneath Crystal's genial public persona lies an artist with exacting standards about what constitutes legitimate comedic artistry.
We never discuss Mr. Vidi's health outside the family. You know better than that.
Like when you go bowling and you know you're in somebody else's shoes?
That's the one.
Throughout his decades-long career, Crystal's commitment to elevating comedy as a respected craft has occasionally put him at philosophical odds with fellow performers whose approaches he viewed as cheapening or undermining the medium he holds sacred. These weren't petty show business rivalries, but fundamental disagreements about comedy's responsibility to audiences and its potential for meaningful artistic expression.
Worst one, actually was the best one. You say it's the worst one. It was the most difficult one. Years ago, we were shooting Throw Mama from the Train.
The tensions that emerge from these encounters reveal fascinating insights into the delicate balance between entertainment and artistry that defines professional comedy. Crystal's conflicts with certain comedians illuminate the passionate debates that rage behind the curtain about timing, taste, and the true purpose of making people laugh. These 6 relationships offer a window into the mind of a comedian who believed that laughter should uplift rather than diminish, and who wasn't afraid to defend that philosophy against popular trends. 6. Eddie Murphy. The relationship between Billy Crystal and Eddie Murphy during the explosive 1980s comedy scene represented a clash between 2 fundamentally different approaches to making audiences laugh, with Crystal's polished observational style standing in stark contrast to Murphy's raw, boundary-pushing energy that electrified clubs and movie theaters alike. Crystal, who had honed his craft through years of careful character development and timing precision, found himself increasingly frustrated with Murphy's unpredictable stage presence and willingness to sacrifice comedic structure for shock value. Their philosophical divide became apparent during their overlapping Saturday Night Live era, where Crystal's sophisticated impressions and storytelling were often overshadowed by Murphy's explosive characters and fearless improvisation. Industry insiders from that period recall Crystal's private concerns about Murphy's approach to comedy, particularly his tendency to rely on profanity and controversial material that Crystal felt undermined the art form's potential for universal appeal. Billy believed comedy should bring people together, recalled SNL writer Alan Swibel in a Comedy Central documentary, while Eddie seemed more interested in pushing buttons and seeing how far he could go before people stopped laughing. Crystal's frustration extended beyond Murphy's stage persona to his film choices, particularly during Murphy's transition from stand-up to movies like Raw and Delirious, which Crystal viewed as missed opportunities to showcase genuine comedic talent. Behind-the-scenes accounts from comedy club owners describe Crystal's visible discomfort when Murphy would take sets in directions that prioritized shock over substance. The competitive dynamic was complicated by Murphy's undeniable success and natural charisma, which attracted audiences even when his material pushed ethical boundaries that Crystal would never consider crossing. 5. Andrew Dice Clay. The collision between Billy Crystal's wholesome comedic sensibilities and Andrew Dice Clay's deliberately provocative persona during the late 1980s comedy boom created one of the era's most defining philosophical battles about the boundaries and responsibilities of comedic performance. Crystal, whose family-friendly humor had earned him respect across generational lines, watched with growing alarm as Clay's leather-jacketed, cigarette-smoking character gained massive popularity through material that Crystal considered not just offensive, but antithetical to comedy's potential for positive social impact. Their contrasting approaches became a lightning rod for industry debates about whether comedy should comfort the afflicted or simply entertain through any means necessary. The tension between them intensified during comedy club circuits, where Clay's sold-out performances often followed Crystal's more traditional sets, creating an uncomfortable juxtaposition that highlighted their fundamental disagreements about audience relationship and comedic responsibility. Club owners from that era remember Crystal's visible frustration when Clay's controversial material would dominate post-show conversations, overshadowing what Crystal considered more skillful and meaningful comedic work. Billy saw Andrew as everything wrong with where comedy was heading, recalled Catch a Rising Star owner Rick Newman, while Andrew probably saw Billy as too safe and predictable for the changing times. Crystal's concerns extended beyond personal taste to broader questions about comedy's cultural influence, particularly Clay's treatment of women and minorities in his act, which Crystal felt perpetuated harmful stereotypes under the guise of entertainment. Their relationship never progressed beyond professional courtesy, though both comedians eventually found their respective audiences and achieved success within their chosen comedic frameworks. We represented two completely different philosophies about what comedy should do, Crystal later acknowledged, and maybe the world was big enough for both approaches, even if I couldn't personally support what he was selling. Fourth, Chevy Chase. Billy Crystal's relationship with Chevy Chase deteriorated over years of witnessing what Crystal perceived as Chase's transformation from a talented comedian into an insufferably arrogant performer who had lost sight of the collaborative spirit that makes comedy truly effective. Crystal, who had admired Chase's early Saturday Night Live work and his breakthrough film performances, became increasingly frustrated as Chase's reputation for difficult behavior began overshadowing his comedic contributions. Their professional paths crossed frequently during the 1980s and 1990s, providing Crystal with multiple opportunities to observe Chase's dismissive attitude toward fellow performers, directors, and even audiences. The breaking point came during various film projects and industry gatherings where Chase's condescending behavior toward younger comedians and crew members conflicted with Crystal's belief that comedy should be built on mutual respect and collaborative energy. Directors who worked with both men described Crystal's visible discomfort when Chase would dominate scenes through ego rather than skill, treating comedy as a vehicle for personal aggrandizement rather than shared entertainment. Chevy had this way of making everyone else feel like they were lucky to be in his presence, recalled director Ivan Reitman, while Billy always made everyone feel like they were part of something special together. Their relationship crystallized Crystal's belief that great comedy requires not just talent, but character, and that success without grace ultimately diminishes both the performer and the art form. Chevy forgot that comedy is about making other people feel good, Crystal observed, and once you lose that connection, all the talent in the world can't save you. 3. David Spade. The generational tension between Billy Crystal's warm, inclusive comedic style and David Spade's razor-sharp, often cruel observational humor created a fascinating study in how different eras of comedy define the boundaries between wit and meanness. Crystal, whose comedy career was built on finding humor in universal human experiences without diminishing his subjects, found himself increasingly uncomfortable with Spade's approach to comedy, which often derived its power from cutting down targets with surgical precision. Their contrasting philosophies became apparent during the 1990s comedy landscape, where Spade's popularity on Saturday Night Live and in films represented a shift toward more cynical humor that Crystal viewed as potentially damaging to comedy's social function. The friction between them intensified during comedy roasts and industry events, where Spade's trademark sarcasm often crossed lines that Crystal considered unprofessional and unnecessarily hurtful. Comedy writers from that era recall Crystal's private concerns about the direction comedy was heading, particularly the celebration of performers who built careers on tearing others down rather than building audiences up. Billy came from an era where comedians were supposed to be lovable, observed former SNL writer Robert Smigel, while David represented this new generation that found power in being unlikable and proud of it. Their relationship highlighted broader questions about comedy's evolution and whether humor's increasing edge represented artistic growth or cultural decline. David was brilliant at what he did, Crystal later reflected. But I always wondered if he realized how much more powerful his talent could be if he used it to lift people up instead of cutting them down. 2. Jerry Seinfeld. The professional rivalry between Billy Crystal and Jerry Seinfeld during the 1980s and 1990s represented a fascinating collision between two masters of observational comedy, whose similar techniques masked fundamentally different philosophies about the emotional purpose of humor. Crystal, whose storytelling approach infused personal warmth and vulnerability into his observations about everyday life, found himself increasingly frustrated with Seinfeld's deliberately detached and analytical approach to comedy, which Crystal felt drained the human connection that made observational humor truly resonant. Their competitive dynamic was complicated by their mutual success and critical acclaim, creating a situation where professional respect coexisted with philosophical disagreement. The tension between them became apparent during comedy club performances, where their contrasting styles would be directly compared by audiences and critics, with Seinfeld's clinical precision often earning praise that Crystal felt overlooked the emotional depth that distinguished truly great comedy from mere intellectual exercise. Industry insiders from that era described Crystal's private frustration with the critical community's embrace of Seinfeld's comedy about nothing philosophy, which Crystal viewed as a retreat from comedy's potential to explore meaningful human experiences. Jerry turned comedy into a science experiment, recalled comedy club owner Bud Friedman, while Billy treated it like an art form that required heart as well as head. Crystal's concerns intensified as Seinfeld's television success began influencing a generation of comedians to adopt similar detached approaches to material, creating what Crystal saw as a disturbing trend toward emotional disconnection in comedy performance. Behind-the-scenes accounts from industry events describe their polite but strained interactions, where Crystal's attempts at warm professional camaraderie would meet Seinfeld's characteristic analytical distance. The rivalry was complicated by their shared respect for comedic craft and similar backgrounds in observational humor. 1. Jim Carrey. Billy Crystal's relationship with Jim Carrey during the 1990s comedy explosion represented a clash between comedic philosophies that highlighted the tension between subtle character work and explosive physical performance, with Crystal's carefully crafted personas often overshadowed by Carrey's manic energy and rubber-faced transformations. Crystal, who had built his career on the delicate art of inhabiting characters through voice, gesture, and timing, found himself frustrated by what he perceived as Carrey's tendency to overwhelm scenes and fellow performers through sheer force of physical comedy rather than collaborative ensemble work. Their contrasting approaches became painfully apparent during joint appearances and industry events, where Carrey's unpredictable antics would dominate attention regardless of the intended focus. The professional tension intensified during film projects and award shows, where Crystal's attempts at structured comedic moments would be upstaged by Carrey's spontaneous physical comedy, creating an uncomfortable dynamic that highlighted their fundamental disagreements about performance discipline and audience respect. Directors who worked with both comedians described the challenge of managing their different energies, with Crystal's preference for rehearsed precision clashing with Carrey's improvisational chaos. Billy needed to know where the laughs were coming from, recalled director Rob Reiner, while Jim seemed to generate them through pure kinetic energy that couldn't be planned or controlled. Their relationship ultimately reflected broader questions about comedy's evolution and whether physical comedy represented a return to classical traditions or a retreat from the intellectual sophistication that Crystal felt the medium had achieved. Jim had incredible gifts, Crystal later acknowledged, but I sometimes wondered if he trusted audiences enough to appreciate comedy that didn't require such overwhelming presentation. Billy Crystal's legendary career stands as testament to comedy's potential for uniting audiences through shared humanity, and his conflicts reveal passionate debates about artistic responsibility and humor. These tensions illuminate the serious craft behind laughter and the struggle between entertainment and enlightenment that defines professional comedy. If you enjoyed exploring these fascinating tensions, subscribe for more behind-the-scenes insights into comedy legends.